that brings up the question of why did we standardize on 24? And I always used to think that it was because that was the slowest rate at which things in motion looked smooth. But then later I learned at least another factor, if not the other factor, was that that's the rate at which optically printed audio on film would sound reasonably okay.
Not quite. Here's what happened. First of all, the original frame rate for film, and this was standardized by the Society of Motion Picture Engineers in 1917, it was their first standard, was 16 frames per second. People didn't talk of frames per second at that time. They talked about feet per minute. So it was 60 feet per minute. Now, that was shot with someone who was cranking a camera, and it was projected with someone who was cranking a projector. And it was actually typical in the old days for the projectionist to crank faster than the camera operator had cranked. And there's
why was that, I wonder?
Well, for one thing, there was an economic incentive. You could get more shows into the day and get people out of the theater and get in another audience.
It faster.
Exactly. And there was also this flicker issue. You wanted to get things above the critical flicker frequency. But, you know, we think that we're very smart. We look at old movies and people are moving too fast and we say, oh, yeah, well, you know, that's because we're not projecting it at the right speed. But in fact, that's what happened at that time. SMPTE sent out another recommendation saying that you should shoot at 60 feet per minute, but you should project at 80 feet per minute. So again, 60 is 16 frames and 80 would be, I don't know, someplace around 22 frames per second, something like that. So when sound came in, the first sound system that was successful was the Vitaphone system, and that's what was used for the jazz singer. And the Vitaphone system was what today we would call a dual system. So the picture was on film, but the sound was on phonograph records. And because of that, there was absolutely no connection between the film speed and the phonograph speed in terms of quality, because you could make the phonograph speed whatever you wanted and the film speed whatever you wanted and just change the gearing in between to keep them in sync. But it had to be a fixed speed. We couldn't have this business of people cranking anymore, because if we did, then the sound would go, lots of wow. So they needed to pick some fixed speed. It didn't really matter what it was, but it had to be something. And so there was an engineer from Western Electric. His name was Stanley Watkins, and he went with Sam Warner and Frank Rich, who was the head of the Vitaphone company, to see the Warner Brothers chief projectionist. And they're all just standing in this little room, and Watkins asks the Warner Brothers chief projectionist, what rate do people show movies at? And the guy says, well, you know, in the first run theaters, it's probably in the range of 80 to 90 feet per minute. But in the little houses where they want to get more shows in, they go faster and they'll do, 100 feet per minute or something like that. And so Watkins just thought for a minute and said, okay, let's compromise on 90. And that's where 24 frames per second came from. 90 feet per minute is 24 frames per second. There was no, no survey.
It really didn't have to do with, engineering work. It was based upon the convention of the time.
Correct. And once they established that, because sound had to have a fixed rate, that's where 24 frames per second was, because they couldn't change it once they established it.